Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Mockaitis.
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us here for episode 358 with Dr. Nick Morgan. He is back, and he's got a fresh book, which is so important, talking about the problems of virtual communication, how they get solved. So you'll learn 1, the magic question that bridges much of the virtual gap. 2, how bad online behavior is leaking into face-to-face communication. And 3, how video calls confuse our sixth sense to exhaust us. So if you'd like to take a look at the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, you'll find that over at awesomeatyourjob.com/ep358. While at awesomeatyourjob.com, I hope you'll check out some of our cool stuff. One cool thing I'd point you to is the Gold Nugget email list, which gives you summary note-taken wisdom insights from each of the guests. We got them from Dr. Nick and from the 358 guests who've gone before him. And in so doing, you get the insight wisdom all the faster. Now, here's Nick's story. Dr. Nick Morgan is one of America's top communication theorists and coaches. He's a passionate teacher who's committed to helping people find clarity in their thinking and ideas and then delivering them with panache. He has been commissioned by Fortune 50 companies to write for many CEOs and presidents. He has coached people to give congressional testimony, to appear on the Today Show, and to deliver an unforgettable TED Talk. He's worked widely with political and educational leaders, and he has himself spoken, led conferences, and moderated panels at venues around the world. Big thanks to Nick for sharing his wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. Here is Nick. Nick, thanks so much for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Pete, it's a great pleasure to be with you again.
Oh, yeah.
We talked a while back.
Indeed. Well, it was such a treat then because your book, Give Your Speech Change the World, was such a hit with me and with many, many readers. And so you've got a new one coming out all about connecting in virtual spaces. At first, I got to see if you have seen this clip from the TV series Silicon Valley about the holographic communication chamber.
No, I haven't, but it sounds cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, the thing that gets me is that they start in and we'll link to it in the show notes. They start in like a fancy holographic chamber, then it's not working and someone's like sticks his face up near the camera trying to fix it. And then it's like, oh, we don't have enough bandwidth. And they get onto like a Skype-like program, and then it sort of freezes up, and it's like, oh, you got to update your software. Then they're on a cell phone, and the connection goes bad. And it's like, that is wise in terms of no matter what technology you've got, something can go awry technically. And then you're speaking about things that aren't quite working even beyond the technical difficulties. So what's the scoop in the book? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's right. The technical stuff is what people tell me about first. And of course, that's very irritating as you just described it. That was a sort of a great compendium of all the things that might go wrong. And as we all know, they do on a regular basis. Calls get dropped. The audio conferences, mute button doesn't work. I mean, the video conference is exhausting for some reason, or it freezes up because there isn't enough bandwidth. I mean, these things, it's the stuff of daily life. And what's fascinating to me is that people just sort of accept that. Mm-hmm. And they don't talk about it much, except, of course, as it's happening. It's a little bit like I was reading about traffic jams the other day, and it turns out that if you measure people's blood pressure while they're stuck in a traffic jam, it goes way up. But as soon as the traffic starts moving, their blood pressure comes back down. It's like they don't stay that angry. That's really interesting to me because it suggests that we have this tolerance for sort of low-level hassle at the technical level. But what's going on beneath that, and what I found in doing the research for the book, is that each of those forms of virtual communication basically strips out the essential thing that humans need to communicate with each other, which is clues that you get when you're face-to-face and talking to somebody easily and naturally about their intent. That's what we care about. We care about what is that other person thinking, feeling. What does that other person mean when they say what they say? So if you're sitting across from somebody and they say, your hair's on fire, and you know them, you can tell immediately whether they're kidding or whether you actually need to get a fire extinguisher. Mm-hmm. Online, you can't tell. And most of our virtual communications, therefore, are endlessly frustrating and endlessly misunderstood because of that lack of emotional information, that lack of human intent. And we imagine that we're communicating the same way. We're all generals fighting the last war. We talk to each other via email, via audio conference, and even via video conferences, which we can get into, assuming that it's the same as face-to-face because we don't really think about it. We don't know any other way to communicate. And as a result, we communicate assuming that everything's getting through. Our intent is getting through, and it actually isn't. And so we can offend the other person, or the other person misunderstands us, and then we don't quite understand why, and we get cranky as a result, and welcome to the virtual world. So that was the territory that I discovered as I began my research.
That's intriguing. So that assertion there is that what we fundamentally want to know is the intention of the person on the other side. You're suggesting your research reveals that we're really more interested in what the human is thinking, feeling, believing than in the sort of word content that they're projecting.
That's absolutely right. We care about their emotions. So it's the emotions tell us how important is this communication? Is this person trying to get something across to us that's desperately important? Is this person just making chit-chat? Is this person flirting with us? Is this person angry at us? Is this person a threat? All those kind of questions play constantly in our unconscious minds, and we want to know the answers to those things. And when we don't get the answers, then that makes us uncomfortable. And here's the added twist about this that I discovered. So imagine the human brain as a multi-channel organism that's constantly seeking for other people's intent and attitude. And then imagine that that attitude doesn't come through, the intent doesn't come through because it's stripped out by virtual communication. Then what happens is the brain doesn't like empty channels, and so it fills the channels with memories and assumptions and stuff it makes up. But, and here's the thing, it fills it with negative information because it makes sense in evolutionary terms to assume the worst. So if you're walking through the savannah and you see a shadow, it makes sense for your brain to assume that it's a tiger and to make steps to get out of the way before you're killed, rather than to assume it's just a friendly rabbit or something. And our brains do the same thing when we don't get other people's intent. We assume that the worst. And that's why virtual communications are always turning into trolling situations, or people are always getting angry at you, or you make what you assume is a joke in, say, email, and the other person is offended for some reason. And you think, how could they be so stupid? I didn't mean that at all. And then you get angry at them, and then you have to spend 6 more emails straightening out the mess that's been created.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is fascinating. So in terms of just fundamental human nature, and I mean, I did not know that in terms of we are naturally filling in the empty channels, and we have a strong bias for filling it in a negative way. I guess I see that all the time.
Right.
But I guess I didn't stop to think that is kind of hardwired into most people, as opposed to, I've bumped into a couple touchy characters, in my day.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are, of course, human exceptions. But what we're talking about here is not the out loud things that people say. People are often more or less like Mr. Rogers in that situation. We're talking about the unconscious assumptions, of course, and those we're less aware of, but they exist very powerfully nonetheless, and they influence our decision making. They influence how we react to other people. And so the brain is out there always asking, is this person friend or foe? What's this person's intent? And when we're not getting a clear answer, we assume the worst.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of virtual communications. And that's the problem. In fact, that's the first of 5 problems that I talk about in the book that lead to so much of our frustration in the virtual world. And the reason why I think, a large part of why so many people have noted that the world has turned angry in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's a phenomenon that many people ask about. And they say, why is everybody so angry these days? And why is the conversation, the political conversation, the business conversation, why all these things turn so sour? And hello, it's because for about the past 10 years, we've switched from mostly face-to-face communications to half virtual, half face-to-face, or maybe it's more like 3/4 virtual, a quarter face-to-face. And it's a huge unregulated social experiment that's been going on for about a decade now, since the mobile phone became ubiquitous. And we're only just now beginning to wake up to the dangers associated with it. I mean, at first, the advantages were obvious. It's easier to communicate, much less friction, to use the Silicon Valley term. It's I can send out thousands of emails. Doesn't cost me anything. I don't have to lick any stamps. I don't have to walk to the post office. I mean, there are all kinds of, they're unquestionable benefits with audio conferences and video conferences and email. I don't have to travel as much, so that cuts down on wear and tear, and it saves the travel budget. So there are powerful incentives to use virtual communications. And that's why, especially as I say, in the last 10 years, that's why it's just swept the planet and swept the human race. But only now are we starting to wake up to the fact that there are some downsides. And for me, the single most alarming statistic that captures this is that a group of psychologists studied the teenage girls and their time on cell phone. And what they found was there's a straight line relationship between the number of hours you spend on your mobile phone and the likelihood that you're depressed.
Oh, wow.
It just goes straight up. It goes straight up. Every hour you add, and it's typical for a teenage girl to spend 6 hours on a cell phone. So
in a day.
Yeah. And the rates of depression are rising at a really alarming rate, and suicide too, tragically.
Well, that is striking. Do you happen to recall, I'm such a dork for the data, like, roughly, hey, what's an extra hour do in terms of my odds for depression?
At the top end, it's like 30% of the cohort are depressed. So do the math backwards. That's around 6 hours per day on the cell phone.
Oh, that is striking.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about this human nature stuff with emails, it reminds me of one of my very first corporate internships. I remember I was at Eaton Corporation, a diversified manufacturing. I had not heard of them before. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is like a Fortune 500 company. This is pretty large and established. And so it was cool. I was like, oh, man, it reminded me of, it's funny. I was familiar with Office Space before I'd actually had been in a cubicle-like environment. And so it was like, there we were. And I actually had a lot of fun. It was interesting characters and intellectual challenges. And I was like, oh, working is fun. This is kind of cool. But one thing that really tripped me up was the emails, because it was sort of like, when I would get an email, I was like, wait, is that person, do they think that I'm not doing my job? I would have all these sort of paranoid thoughts pop in.
Right.
And then when I sent an email, I'd have a couple of times in which someone, seemed kind of rankled with me. And I remember my buddy Dan and I, we sort of partnered up with each other. We called it PCS, Political Consulting Solutions, in which we would preview each other's emails and provide feedback on how it could be misconstrued in a way that's going to, really upset the other person. And we spent a lot of time on this. It was wild.
That's such a great example of what I'm talking about. I love that. And your solution is one that, broadly speaking, that I suggest, which is you begin to create a community that discusses the implications of this. The reason why most people don't do that is that one of the unintended consequences of making email easy compared to office memos back in the day or interoffice mail or whatever it was people used to do is that we get tons of it now. We're buried in, and everybody talks about information overload. That's because it's easy to do. And so we have a difficult time just coping with it all. And so we tend to go through it very quickly. We just react emotionally. And so we actually are using that unconscious brain in a way that's also has its unintended consequences and leads to negativity and suspicion and paranoia and all those juicy things. So that's a great example.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And so you say you've laid out 5 key problems associated with this. And so I'd love to get your view on, what are the problems and your sort of favorite practice to ameliorate that problem or to address it a bit.
Yeah. So the first one I talked about is this lack of feedback, is the fact that I can't detect what you're intending toward me. So it's like a sensory deprivation chamber, most virtual communications in one form or another. So email is the worst because that's just words, black and white marks on a screen. Of course, at audio conference, you get a little bit of the people's intent through the voice. Actually, some of that is stripped out, and I can talk about the technical reasons for that. That gets a chapter in my book. So audio conferences are worse than you think, which is why we find them so boring. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of information there. And we get a little bit more in a video conference. But on the whole, video conferences, while people think, I'm actually seeing the other person, you have to remember it's still just a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional person. So it's still screening out things that you get easily and instantly face-to-face that you don't get in video conferencing, which is why video conferencing is so tiring for most people. So that's the first big problem, is the lack of feedback. The second one is that as a result of that lack of feedback, we lack empathy. Normally, say if you're standing with somebody, you're having a quick conversation and you say something sarcastic and you see the pain in their eyes, you can do something instantly, and people mostly do, nice people on the whole. They'll pat you on the arm or say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, or because they'll see the reaction in your eyes and they'll get right away that your intent back to me is that, you hurt my feelings. And so people can repair that because we have that empathic connection. So that's the second big problem, is that empathic connection is just largely gone. Mm-hmm. The third problem is that you don't have any control of your own persona, or not enough control, because what happens online, since it's done by machines, for machines, through machines, is that it remembers forever. So the classic example of this is the drunken frat boy and sorority girl pictures on Facebook that come back to haunt you when you're trying to get your first job. And we all can appreciate that sometimes things happen in social media or online that we wish would go away. And some governments around the world have started to rewrite the rules so that you are allowed to insist that information like that be pulled down. But it's not universal yet. And it's very hard to do. It's time consuming and a struggle. And so lack of control over your own persona, the information that's out there, is a problem. And this is an interesting one because when I first started talking about this with my publishers, their reaction was, that doesn't seem all that important, really, until I said, and they said, you might want to leave that one out. And then I said, well, come on now. Think of the number of times in a day that somebody Googles you. And they hadn't really thought about before, but people Google you now when they meet you. If you're a potential customer, or if they're going to be your customer, you Google them. If you're going to date a relative of theirs, they'll Google you. People Google each other now often, and on and on and on. And the result is that that there is a information about you out there online, sort of whether you're aware of it or not. And the other thing that happens is, for people who do take control of this and create a website and a persona, and you Google their name and up comes something that looks sort of bright and breezy and professional and interesting, right? And compare that with somebody else who you Google, and maybe there are 3 or 4 different Nick Morgans that come up, and one of them looks a little sketchy and the other one might be me and whatnot. Then you think, this person doesn't exist, right? Like, what's the matter with them, right? Why don't they have a website? So in a way, it's also the competition that if you don't control your persona, then people see you as less than human. So that's the third big problem. The fourth problem is that, and this is a really subtle one, is that when you take out these emotions, as I've been describing, then it actually makes it hard to make good decisions. And the reason for that is we like to think of ourselves as logical beings who make logical decisions. But in fact, most of our decisions are based on emotions. And there's a famous case of the stroke victim named H.M., whose initials are used in the medical literature because he's so famous. But his, he was kept anonymous, but his initials are used. So he had a stroke which paralyzed the emotional centers of his brain, and he was therefore unable to make decisions because it's emotions we use to rate the importance of something. Yeah. And this is easy to understand if you go back to a very simple example from your childhood. Hopefully this never happened to you, but let's pretend you walked up to a stove at age 2 and you saw this bright glowing orange thing and you thought, oh, that looks cool, and you put your finger on it. Mm-hmm. Then what happened? Well, then suddenly you were subsumed with rage and pain and anger and fear and terror. And you started screaming for your mother, and all kinds of things happened, right? You never forgot that moment if that happened to you. And you made a decision right then and there, and you always followed it ever since. Never put your finger on a glowing hot stove ever again. So that goes up there because so much pain is associated with it as a very high and important decision. Sounds silly, but that's the way in which our brain create structures in order to allow us to make decisions. We rate things on their importance based on the number of times they come up in our memory and the amounts of emotion that are attached to them. Mm-hmm. If you think of remodeling, recently we were remodeling our kitchen, and there's a ton of decisions you have to make when you're remodeling a kitchen. Yes. You have to decide what's the surfaces and what are the cabinets going to look like. And
the knobs. There's so many choices of knobs.
There are whole stores just devoted to knobs, Pete. It's crazy. You can lose your mind trying to make these decisions, right? Mm-hmm. Well, how do you make those decisions? Ultimately, you start out all happy to do it. And let's pick the best one. And you do a little research. And then after a while, you've made about 50 decisions. You just can't stand anymore. You just start going, that one. You just point and you say, I'll take that one. What are you basing it on? You're basing it on some kind of emotional memory that drawer pull reminded you of one that you used to have in your home when you were a kid and you loved it, or you want one that's different from the one you used to have in your home when you were a kid because you hated the home when you were a kid. So that's how we make those kind of decisions. We make them based on emotions and memories.
Mm-hmm. Or even if you're imagining the future or likening it to, it's like, oh man, that's so futuristic. That's like some cutting edge Star Trek space age knob there. I want to be like Captain Picard when I'm opening my drawer.
That fits my image of myself. Yeah. Or the image that I want to be. Yeah. So that's the fourth problem. And then the final one is that when you compromise this kind of decision making and emotional connection, then what happens is people don't commit in the same way. And this is where we get into the whole trolling problem and the fact that we've all experienced at a very simple level. Like if contrast, say, the Amazon website, most of us shop on Amazon, and we keep going back to Amazon. Why? Because they're completely obsessive about making that experience work for us. Mm-hmm. But think about another shopping website that you've gone to where the experience wasn't that great. Maybe the response was slow or it was hard to find the right product or in the end they sent you the wrong one. You had to send it back, and that was an incredible hassle. How many times are you going to go back to that website? Yeah. Never, right? You're one and done. And that's the nature of the online world, is one and done, compared to a face-to-face world where if you have a, say, convenient coffee shop, maybe one time the barista screws up the coffee and gives you something that doesn't taste very good. But you forgive him because he's a human being, and it's local and convenient, and you're going to go back there again, right?
Yeah.
And if it happens enough times, maybe you won't. You'll find another place. But face-to-face, the experience is very different. We have a much higher tolerance and a much stronger sense of commitment to people that we meet face-to-face. And that's the final problem. It's just the online commitment, the online connection between people is very fragile and very transient. And so if we try to communicate, and this is my main point in the book, is we're still trying to communicate as if we were living in a face-to-face world. And so we assume those kind of connections are made on the same basis as they are in the real face-to-face world, and they're not. And so I go into a email conversation in a way I haven't really reflected on, kind of assuming the other person knows my intent. Why? Because when I talk to them face-to-face, they pick up my intent without any effort. So I don't have to put a lot of that into my email if I'm thinking in those terms. But in fact, I do, and that's really the beginning of the solution. Is I say you need to start putting in the emotions and the clarity and the intent, specifically the human intent, into your email. And it feels strange at first, but I say it all begins with a question, which a neuroscientist told me he thinks about under the circumstances, which is, how does what I just said make you feel?
Okay.
As soon as you ask that question, then the whole game changes, and we can begin to turn virtual communications into something that works not quite as well still as face-to-face because of the way our unconscious minds are wired, but it's going to work reasonably well. But that's the key thing. And there are two implications of that. First of all, it allows you to tell me how you're feeling emotionally, because it gives time for that and gives the space for it. But second, it also gives you the respect to say, I care about how you feel. Now, face to face, I can't help but care, because if I say something and then it hurts your feelings and I see the pain in your eyes, then I'm hardwired to care about that, because we humans are decent, most of us. The number of psychos are thank God, fairly small. And so most of us are hardwired to respond sympathetically to that. We have empathy, and so we care. But online we don't. And so that's why we need to ask that question. How does what I just said make you feel? So it's about taking the time to do that, and also showing the other person the respect and the empathy and the caring that says, I want to know these things. I'm going to take a moment to do that. So it involves a real shift. It's not difficult to understand or technically difficult to do, but it involves a huge shift in just the way we think about communication, because essentially what we're doing is putting back in the emotional connection, the intent, the clarity about intent, which we do reasonably well most of the time face to face, and we do horribly online. Horribly.
Yeah. Well, that's striking in terms of that. I could see, you've made a compelling case here for why this is extra critically necessary when it comes to the online dimensions. Although I don't think it's a bad question for in-person contexts either, because I think a lot of times, I guess, for example, if you're looking at a room of a dozen people in a conference room and you're presenting something, it can be hard to kind of keep your eye on all of them at the same time.
That's right.
And so it'd be great to get some of that feedback. What's great is it could even surface information that's not yet conscious, I'd say. I'm just imagining this playing out to the person you're saying it to, because how does this make you feel? Especially if they're on the spot and they can't, squirm out and say nothing. They might say, if you have a decent relationship, I guess some people will just not say anything.
Yes. Yeah.
I can imagine a lot of times let's say, how does this make you feel? And they're like, yeah, it's fine, I guess. And it's just the emotion is sort of uninspired.
Right. But then you'll know.
Yeah.
Then you'll know that. You can tell by the reaction. Yeah.
It's this proposal is fine, I guess. It'll probably get the job done, but it's not going to inspire, tremendous energy, enthusiasm, and commitment from me and the people on my team. Are we okay with that? Or are we not okay with that? Oh, well, now that's a whole nother conversation that maybe needs to be had.
That's right. It's a good thing to have. And I think one of the things you're pointing to is that what's happening is that some of our bad behavior that we've learned online is in danger of leaking back into our face-to-face. And so, and we've all complained about this when we go into a meeting and half the people are on their cell phones. And you're going, wait a minute, don't you even have the courtesy to put down the cell phone and talk to me? Here we are face-to-face. We've gone to all the trouble to get together face-to-face, and you're still on your cell phone. Come on. That isn't acceptable behavior. And some people surface that and insist that people leave their cell phones at the door or turn them off or whatever. But I've noticed more and more, and I know many other people have as well. I'm sure you have bad behavior from virtual communications. We're leaking back into face-to-face, and in effect, making the worst possible outcome would be if face-to-face were dragged down to the level of virtual communications.
Yeah. I'm just imagining we would pull out an emoji note card from our pockets and to just display that. This is my response to what you've said.
Well, I say in the book that we're in danger of raising a generation of people who are uncomfortable communicating face-to-face and incompetent communicating online.
Well, that is quotable. Tweet that. Well, and spooky.
Yeah, scary.
Well, I want to kind of hit something you said earlier before it disappears. And I was quite intrigued. You mentioned that because of our kind of false assessment of what's being transmitted in audio, that leads to it being very boring. And because of our false assessment with video, that results in the 2D versus 3D, that results in it being very tiring. Can you explain that pathway a little bit more and these two dimensions?
Yeah, sure. So this involves a slightly technical explanation, but I'll make it as simple and brief as I can. So what happened when the phones were invented and the engineers said we've got to get the human voice into twisted copper pair, that was the original phone line, was that they studied the human voice and realized that the human voice covers 3 bands of sound. So there's the basic pitch at which, say, you and I are speaking. And if I held one of the vowels that I'm saying out loud and made a kind of a note out of that. So no, if I held that tone, we could find that on the piano. We could find that pitch.
Yeah.
And the pitch at which people speak exists within a pretty narrow band of about around 200 hertz. it goes up to about 300, 350 and goes down to about 100. But it's a pretty narrow band, several hundred hertz wide. And the human, if you think about human hearing, one of the extraordinary things is we can hear up to 20,000 hertz when we're young and healthy. As time goes on, if we listen to too much loud rock music, we lose a bit at the top. But the basic human hearing range is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Now, you think about why did we evolve to do that? And the reason is something quite extraordinary about the human voice. We can identify other people's voices without any apparent effort at all. That's an extraordinary achievement when you think about it. As soon as you pick up the phone and it's your significant other calling, or a family member, your mother, your father, friends, family, or if you hear politicians or famous actors' voices on television or on the radio, you instantly know who all these people are. You know, without any effort, several hundred voices. It's an extraordinary thing when you think about it. And the way you know that is there's the basic pitch that people speak, but every human voice is like a fingerprint in that it's individual and is characterized by a certain set of overtones over the basic pitch and undertones under the basic pitch. So there are three bands, as I said. They're the overtones that your voice makes, which we can't hear consciously, but are fed into the sound of Pete's voice or Nick's voice. And then they're the basic pitch at which we're speaking, and then they're the undertones. Now, what the engineers realized was you could leave off the overtones and undertones, and you'd still be able to understand the basic pitch. You'd be able to hear and understand what people were saying. They noticed that the human voice became a little less distinctive. It was a little harder to tell people apart, but not impossible, because you still got some of that sound richness, even in the narrow band. Okay. So that's what people did for telephones. And then the same thing happened. There was never a time when it suddenly became convenient to put massive more bandwidth into the sound of the human voice. Once the original science had been done, nobody ever thought, let's redo this and suddenly increase, the earbuds and the speaker phones and everything, so they can get 20,000 to 20 hertz. So they never did that. As a result, these sounds are vastly restricted to that narrow band of the basic pitch. Now, here's why that's important. When you take out the undertones, especially, also the overtones to a certain extent, but when you take out the undertones, then you take out the emotion. Emotion is conveyed in the undertones. Now, because of our earlier discussion, you'll know that that's very important. As soon as you take out the emotions, then it gets hard to make good decisions. And it's also very boring because emotions, other people's intent, are what we care about. So basically, the simple way to put this is when you're on a regular team meeting with your team, which is spread out all over the world, and your boss is droning on about something, you can't tell as well what the emotions are being conveyed in his or her voice because the undertones are taken out. They're edited out. And as a result, your boss is both boring and you can't read him or her as well. And so that's why there's the stories of what people do on audio conferences in order to stay human, alive, and on the planet are hilarious and legion. I mean, people, the vast majority of people, as soon as they get an audio conference, put their phone on mute and start doing their email. They're only half there. And then there are lots of good stories. When I was doing the research, I came up with a number of hilarious stories about gross and disgusting things, some of which I couldn't put in the book, that people do when they put the phone on mute instead of listening on the audio conference. So
you can't let that go. Give us just one or two examples, please.
Well, of course, people go to the bathroom and then forget.
Sure.
And so
they
do,
bummer.
Make revolting noises.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, embarrassing noises. But my favorite, people have sex, believe it or not, and sometimes that gets overheard. While you're on the poor audio conference, imagine somebody else is having a good time. but my favorite one is there was a team that had a group based in South America, in Brazil, I think it was, and a team in Asia and a team in the United States. And obviously everybody except whoever the poor soul was talking had their phones on mute because an earthquake happened to the Brazilian team. They left their phones on mute and fled the building and didn't come back, and nobody noticed. The rest of the world didn't know. The rest of the team had no idea that their teammates in Brazil were suffering an earthquake. So that tells you just how dissociated and ridiculous audio conferences are.
Oh, man.
The other somewhere else on the phone can have an earthquake and you don't even know.
That is wild. And it's not just one person. It's just
right.
Numerous.
There were several sitting around that conference room table, which was by then shaking, obviously.
That is wild. Well, thank you for that. So, now with these undertones, overtones business, now I hear that I have a mental image, or I guess audio picture of what that sounds like in terms of when I'm speaking on the phone with someone or a conference call. But like if I'm using something like a Zoom or a Skype, are we collecting the full range from an audio bandwidth signal?
It depends a lot on the technology. What happens is, though, even if you use a good microphone, then the person at the other end may not be getting all the information because of what he or she may be listening on.
Okay, yeah.
If you're listening on earbuds are the worst, even good ones. Of course, you use this kind of trick technology. They don't actually reproduce the low notes, and they use a trick of the human ear to make you think you're hearing it by suggesting, by doubling up on the note. Oh,
so I'm not actually hearing the real stuff, but it's kind of trying to give me something that resembles it.
Your brain is filling it in.
Whoa.
Right. Brain is filling it in to a certain extent. And so you're not actually, so we're having this lovely conversation, Pete, but you're not actually hearing my voice. You're hearing a kind of memory and a construction of my voice.
Well, so that's interesting. Well, and I want to get your quick view then while we're on that subject. So I've used a lot of meeting platforms in my day, and you've done a boatload of research. I know that different circumstances and contexts call for different solutions, but if you had to give me your personal favorite in the world of Zoom versus BlueJeans versus GoToMeeting versus Adobe Connect, which one would you say reigns supreme?
What I'm liking is, so there are some Zoom setups that I've seen. Zoom seems to be the easiest to me, just of all the ones I've used. I've used them all. I have no particular beef or no investment in any particular one. But Zoom seems to be the easiest. And some Zoom setups are starting to build in better speakers so that you can get a broader range of response built into the room, for example. And so I'm in favor of those kind of setups where we start to put back in the sounds that have been stripped out. But understand one other thing, we were going to talk about video. So let me just quickly say the issue with video, and that's another interesting one. So that we humans are brought up to think about the five senses, and that's sort of what we imagine we have. But there's actually a sixth sense that all of us have, which works very, very hard, and that's called proprioception. And proprioception is the effort that your mind and my mind make to track our location in space and the location of everybody around us. And so just to pick a fun example, that's why most people find cocktail parties so exhausting, because there are a lot of people milling around and you keep track of where all those people are. Your unconscious mind is keeping track of where all those people are, even if you can't see them. So even the ones behind you, you're doing it with a little bit of sort of that weird sixth sense, again, that people have of the prickly feeling in the back of your neck. You kind of know somebody's behind there. And so maybe you sneak a little look. So it's a combination of looking and sort of the feeling that you get when there's somebody behind you and physical sensation and shadows and all. You use all the means at your disposal. Proprioception is a very hard-working little sense to keep track of where everybody is. Well, on video, that doesn't come through. And once again, that channel is emptied out pretty much because you can't tell where that other person actually is in space because they're sitting on a two-dimensional screen, which is maybe 4 or 5 feet from your face. But they aren't kind of there because you only see like their head and shoulders. And so they aren't actually 4 feet away from you, but you don't know where they are. Are they 10 feet, 20 feet? And so your brain works really hard and assumes that person is both more dangerous than they actually are and further away or closer than they actually are. You don't get a good read on it. And so your brain's working extra hard, and it's, again, filling that channel with information which is made up, essentially. And so we find that very exhausting. And that's why people often end up shouting at each other on video conferences or report themselves fatigued after an hour of a video conference. It's very hard unless you really practiced at it, to do a long video conference. Whereas most people, if they're enjoying the conversation, wouldn't mind an hour or two conversation face to face.
Well, you're bringing me back to some days in which I've done 11 hours of video coaching calls in a day. And I can confirm that tuckered me out good.
There you go. I'm impressed it went that long.
I've reduced the load in the years since.
Well, just remember, you're making your unconscious brain work very hard. And I talk in the book about things you can do to improve it. So one of the things that sounds trivial, but it's really not, is you can do this on your end, is set up your video conferencing to give the other person subtle clues as to the depth of perception involved in the room. So I say, have something that's near you that they can easily estimate the size of, and then put something like a plant, a few feet back, and then have a wall clearly behind that with things on it that will help them size what they're seeing. And if you give people those 3 layers of depth, then that's actually visually very helpful for them. And so they'll find talking to you much less stressful than they otherwise would. It takes a certain amount of effort. And of course, adequate lighting. Everybody has heard that, I'm sure, now about video conferencing. It takes, because it's just a camera, a TV camera, and it takes a lot of light to reproduce enough through the pixels that you need a lot of extra light. And that's something that most people don't do. And so we're squinting into the gloom and we can't see the other person very well. So adequate lighting and a sense of depth perception really go a long way to improving that sense of ease that you'll give the other person. Now, that won't help you unless the other person does the same thing. But at least you can be kind to whoever you're talking to.
Well, now part of me is wondering if you did the reverse, in terms of like, I put like a giant can of Coca-Cola, just to really mess with their whole setup.
You see, that wicked thought,
that
comes from online communication. There you go.
Oh, man.
You're prone to misbehave.
I'm guilty. Well, tell me, anything else you want to make sure to mention before we, hear about a couple of your favorite things and to see if there's any new favorite things since last time?
Yeah, sure. So I would just say one of the other quick fixes that I talk about, which I recommend very highly for anybody who has an ongoing team audio conference, that sort of arrangement where you have people in Singapore and the US and Europe, say, and you talk to them all every week or all the time, and you need to keep an ongoing happy relationship with them. Then at the beginning of every call, do the virtual temperature check, is what I call it, where you ask them, think of a stoplight, red, yellow, or green. You can also say amber if you like amber better. Red, amber, or green. And red means this is an awful day, there's disaster, you probably should let me off this call. Yellow means I'm having a stressful day, but I'm okay to be on the call, but cut me some slack. And green means everything's great. And what you find is if you ask people just to do that simple check, they feel they have permission to do that. Whereas often what happens on audio conferences is your world may be falling apart around you, but you get to the audio conference because you have to do it. It's your job. And you don't feel comfortable saying online on an audio conference like that, well, actually, life's awful right now, and here's what's going on. That audio conference setup, because it's stripped of emotion, doesn't give us the permission to do that typically. And so audio conferences often get off to a bad start because half the team is missing in action, either literally or figuratively, and nobody knows. And so resentment builds up and misunderstandings build up. So this is a way of just getting clear and allowing whoever the team leader is to say, if somebody does say red, say, well, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to be let off the call? Shall I get back to you later? Do you want to have a side conversation? It allows you just to handle that in a compassionate and thoughtful way. And same with yellow. You can say, well, so I'm sorry that it's not green. Do you want to talk about it, or is it good enough that you can get along? And they'll make a choice. And then do the same thing at the end of the call. It's very quick. It's easy to do. And yet it allows you to put some of that emotional connection back in that the internet has and virtual communication has taken out.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
I always come back to the only reason to give a speech is to change the world. That's my favorite all-time quote. And I probably said that the last time. That's still my all-time favorite quote. I use that with clients all the time when we're talking about asking, is this speech have enough impact? Is it going to change the world? And of course, that means for a specific audience, a specific moment. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a politician announcing world peace or something like that. People can change the world in small but important ways. But I think it's a great quote and a great test for any kind of public communication.
Mm-hmm. And how about a favorite book?
Favorite book? I just read the 12 Rules for Life,
all right,
the Peterson book. And I think that's very thoughtful. It's not that the 12 rules are so surprising. They aren't. They're basically the golden rule and a few others of decent behavior to each other. But what's really incredible about that book is the discussion leading up to each of the 12 rules. It's just very deep, thoughtful examination of human frailty and the nature of evil in the world and why we do the things we do and how we need to treat each other. Just a very deep and important book, I think. I got a lot out of that.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Like you say, the rules won't surprise you, but it's the discussion that's thoughtful and useful.
Mm-hmm. And how about a favorite habit?
A favorite habit?
Yeah.
Besides coffee? Yeah. Coffee and cookies. My new favorite habit is I've started to do more yoga and Tai Chi because Tai Chi is beautiful. It's kind of like organized slow dance. I was never a very good dancer, so Tai Chi sort of gives me the illusion that I can kind of control my body and space. And my only fear about it is it doesn't feel like much exercise. I'm not working up a sweat doing Tai Chi, but my Tai Chi instructor keeps telling me, no, this is very good for you. This will be very good for your circulation and your balance and all kinds of good things. So I've really been enjoying Tai Chi.
Oh, cool.
Recommend it highly. Very good way to de-stress and to do a different thing than your normal day-to-day life, which involves much virtual communication.
Oh, thank you. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
Publicwords.com is our website. Mm-hmm. PUBLICWORDS. And there's a contact form on there. You can reach out or just shoot me an email at nick@publicwords.com.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks seeking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yes, I do. If you're spending any kind of time communicating virtually, then I challenge you to think about how am I going to make clear what my intent is in these conversations and these communications, and how am I going to give other people the perspective to find out what their intent or reaction is. So it begins with asking yourself the question, asking other people around you the question, how did what I just say make you feel? Mm-hmm. And proceeding from there. But we need to put that respect and care for each other's emotions and reactions back into virtual communication.
Awesome. Well, Nick, this has been a real treat. Thanks again for coming on back, and I wish you tons of luck with Can You Hear Me and all the good stuff you're doing.
Pete, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I think the thing that'll probably stick with me the most is how Dr. Nick Morgan explained how conference calls are boring, or rather why they're boring, because, wow, I've often felt that, boy, this is so boring. What's going on? So if you're feeling that, not to worry. It's not that you hate your job and your colleagues and you need to get out of there because you're no longer stimulated and engaged in your work. Nay. It's just a matter of voice frequencies missing. And that's why you're bored. You don't know the emotional content or intent going on over there. So I thought that was pretty helpful. That and that powerful question. How do you feel about what I just said? So much good stuff. Nick Morgan coming back for a second helping of the goods. If you want to check out the show notes, the transcript, the links to items we've referenced, it's at awesomeatyourjob.com/F358. And I hope you'll push the subscribe button if you haven't already. You'll catch our next guest. It is Karen Hurt, and she is talking about the fear of speaking up, what it is, where it comes from, and how to ultimately overcome it. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. Hope to catch you there. Peace.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. To get the most out of this conversation, visit awesomeatyourjob.com to find today's show notes, transcript, and infographic summary cheat sheet. For more entertaining professional skill sharpening, be sure to subscribe to catch the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.